Thank you. It's great to be back in Tampa. Thanks everyone for being here. We have joining us State Senator Blaise Ingoglia from the Tampa Bay region, just north of here. President and CEO of the James Madison Institute, Bob McClure. We have Nathan Shirk as a local real estate agent, Tampa resident Kathy Gallo. We also have joining us our great Senator Jay Collins from the Tampa area, so I want to thank you. And we have other dignitaries with us, so thanks everyone for being here. We're here today to discuss an issue that I think is really significant for a lot of Floridians, and that's the burden of property taxes and the need for property tax relief. This is something I've been talking about for many, many months now after listening to folks and trying to figure out what can we do to make Florida even better. We are currently one of the best states for, if not the best, for state-level taxation. We have no income tax, and a decent chunk of the revenue that the state generates is not paid by Florida residents. It's paid by snowbirds and visitors and tourists. And isn't that the way you want taxation to go? Offload as much of the burden to non-residents as possible so that we can relieve the burden on our residents. I think that makes a lot of sense, and that's the philosophy that we need to continue to do. So we've had that, but you also have at the local level property taxes. And while we do have things like homestead exemption, which helps softens the blow, the reality is we're not even in the top 20 when it comes to property taxes. And we need to change that. We need to make sure that we're giving taxpayers relief when it comes to property taxes. And we have a philosophical, issue. If you come and you're a tourist from Canada and you visit Florida, you can choose to buy what you want and purchase what, it's voluntary, right? So when you're paying the tax, there's a voluntary element to it. Most of the essentials that people need, like food and water, are not taxed under Florida sales tax anyways. So you can decide to go on that vacation to Florida knowing that you'll have to pay different taxes for your purchases. When it comes to owning your home, though, for some reason, they don't give you a choice in that. You own your property, you own your house, and yet you got to perpetually pay, pay taxes, which is effectively rent to the government, just to be able to live on your property. If you stop paying the property tax, they could take your property, and so that's wrong. And philosophically, it's not the way you would want to raise revenue. You would much prefer to do it on consumption, particularly when we have 142 million visitors who come to Florida and are able to contribute to the coffers. And so that's really what it means to be a low-tax state. Now, we have seen in recent years a dramatic increase in property values. Now, there's some benefit to that. If that's your main source of wealth that you own, that's going to go up. You're going to be wealthier as a result of that. But on the flip side of that is your house gets assessed as more, even though you didn't sell it. It's just an unrealized gain. And you get higher valuations, and even with homestead, it still goes up in terms of what you pay, and especially when people have to move, and then they buy a new house, then they're at a much higher tax basis, and then that becomes very difficult. So the burden of property taxes is real. We have launched a DOGE effort from the state government that is looking at our agencies, because we do this as a matter of course, but we want to do better, looking at our universities, but also looking at local governments. And so we had a number of local governments who have volunteered to participate in that. Some of the ones that need it the most have been the least likely to want to participate in that. We tried to work with the legislature to get DOGE in law so that we could send teams down to these city and county governments, because I think what you've seen is, you go back the last 4 or 5 years, you've seen big growths in these budgets that really outstrips population growth by a long shot. And so the question is do they need to be spending that much money? Do they need to be taking money from you in property taxes to fuel increase in budgets? And I think you should know, and you should, as taxpayers, have an ability to evaluate that appropriately. And so we are going to do we're going to continue to work to get the DOGE where it needs to be. I mean, we've already done. We helped. We met with Elon Musk a couple months ago, and we had rejected federal spending under Biden They didn't know how to take it back, and so we worked with them, and they revoked the authorization. So that was contributing almost $1 billion to the DOGE efforts. We just announced some of the grants and alerted them, and they've taken back some federal grants from universities, such as West Florida, which was about social justice, and that's not an appropriate use of tax dollars. So we've been working really hard to do it. Having said that, most of these budgets, if you just went back to 2019, 2020 levels, you wouldn't miss a beat on a lot of this stuff. I mean, you really could get the job done. So we want to be able to show that, because some people say, oh, well, we want property tax relief, but, quote, it just can't be done. Yeah, it can be done, okay? Florida's proven we can get big things done, and so you can do it, and it's something that I think is really, really important. Now, we have provided, since I've been governor, record amount of tax relief for Florida residents, including in this most recent year, we've eliminated, well, a couple years ago, we fully eliminated sales tax on all baby items. So diapers, wipes, all these things, that's not taxable in Florida anymore. It used to be taxable. We got that off the books. We've done disaster preparedness tax holidays. We've done back to school tax holidays. We're proposing for this summer to do a marine fuel tax holiday so that you can fuel up your boats without having to pay a tax on the fuel, as well as a Second Amendment summer so that you can buy what you need for Second Amendment activities without tax. And there's a whole bunch of other things that irons in the fire. But we've done billions and billions of dollars in tax relief, and I think people appreciate it. It's kind of like every little bit helps. We've done, I mean, we did a toll relief for commuters, $500 million each of the last 2 years total, $1 billion total. People appreciate that. They get a 50% rebate on their tolls, and only applied to Florida residents. And so if you had a transponder from out of state, it didn't apply. We've done the Freedom Summer, where you can go and get no tax on outdoor activities. So we even did a gas tax holiday when gas really spiked under Biden. And we're proud of that, and we want to make sure that we're continuing to stand with taxpayers. Here's the thing, though. I called for property tax relief. Most of this obviously is local. We know that, but there is part of it that the state mandates for, it's called required local effort for education. I've proposed we have the money to fully fund the education budget, and we can send you a rebate on your property taxes this year. People could get, and we'd only do it for homesteaded Floridians. I could do it for the snowbirds, but you could get a rebate on property tax between $300 and $1,000, depending on the way the package would go. Isn't that something that would be beneficial? And then we're going to build to do a property tax relief on the ballot in 2026, which is really how you have to do it, to do a constitutional amendment to provide protections for homeowners. So this is all very doable. Now, there's folks in the Florida House of Representatives, if you followed how this has gone in the legislative session, when I propose something, the leadership there, they just reflexively oppose it. I mean, that's their view. Now, they didn't run on that. They ran on our agenda, and they seized power because of us. They wouldn't have a supermajority if it wasn't for us. And yet they're there just trying to stop, good progress. So go back to January. Before President Trump took office, I called a special session of the legislature because we needed to increase our cooperation and authorities to assist the federal government with President Trump's immigration enforcement agenda. Very popular with the voters that sent us there, was a big part of the president's mandate. Obviously, there's not enough federal authorities in terms of ICE agents to get the job done without state and local cooperating. And so we said, in Florida, all state and local must cooperate. We're not a sanctuary state, and we want to make sure that they're on board. We also want to make sure that we have appropriate legal authorities to hold criminal aliens so that we don't do catch and release. We also want to make it a crime to illegally enter Florida. And, we had a liberal judge, but that always happens. We'll work that through. So we wanted a really robust package, and the leadership in the Florida House rejected doing that. They said it was premature, they said it wasn't necessary, and all this stuff. They attacked me. And what happened was, and the people had a really negative reaction to that. people are like, do your job. You need to be on board with the president. You need to be on board with the governor. And they weren't willing to do that. And so they got a lot of blowback. So then finally they had to come to the table. But they tried to jam through a bill to make Florida a de facto sanctuary state. So rejecting my call to have state and local cooperate, rejecting my call to end catch and release, rejecting really, and it's not even me, like I'm doing what people who are smart in this area know needs to be done and what the people wanted to see happen. And so they tried to do that, and that blew up in their face. And so finally, you know, they had to be brought kicking and screaming to do the legislation we have. And now what's happening? Florida's leading the nation on state-level immigration enforcement, and we are the bright spot working with the Trump administration to get the job done. We just had Operation Tidal Wave. They rounded up 1,300 illegal aliens. Many of them either had criminal charges or had already been ordered to be deported, because, you know, you hear due process. And first of all, you know, you come illegally, you're not entitled to an O.J. Simpson trial before you can be deported. Deportation's not a punishment. It's basically just enforcing the state's sovereignty. And obviously you want to make sure that people don't have a right to be here. I mean, so there needs to be, you know, some check on that for sure. But the idea that this should be dragged out is ridiculous. Having said that, once they've already gone through this process and have been ordered to be removed, why are we having any discussion at that point? Of course you want to do it. But they were opposed to that. And the reason why, I mean, look, I think that they are more, the leadership in the House is probably more sympathetic with more of the open borders. But part of it was they didn't want me to get a, quote, win. That's how these people think. They're not trying to do your business. They're pursuing their own personal agenda. They have vendettas. They have these things. And so that was a really telltale sign. That is not the way you should be operating. You should be doing the people's business. And this was something that had major support, and obviously it's been very effective. And so that's kind of the backdrop on all this stuff. And so they don't want to do property tax relief. And how do you know that? Well, they rejected my calls to do it during the regular session, but then the House leadership convened on the last day of session a hearing on a task force for property tax with 37 members, including some of the most liberal Democrats who do not want to give you property tax relief in the entire state of Florida. You don't convene a 37-person committee if you're trying to get something done. You convene a 37-person committee if you're trying to smother it in the crib. They're trying to kill any chance of property tax relief by doing this committee. And if you were so committed to this, why would you wait till the last day of the legislative session to do it? Obviously, this is a political ploy. It is not something that is real. So you have that. But then what are they trying to do? Well, because we want to do property tax, they've come up with an idea that I don't think I've heard a single voter endorse as being something that would be good. Their idea, instead of giving you property tax relief, they want to do an across-the-board 1/4 of 1 penny reduction in the state sales tax. Now, what would that mean for you? The average Floridian would save a whopping $47 if they were to do it. But what would it also do? It would relieve the burden on Canadian tourists, visitors. We had 142 million visitors. I want them to pay more and you as Floridians to pay less. Why are we proposing a tax break for non-Florida residents, for foreigners, for one of the 142 million people that visit us? No, it's good that they're contributing. Your roads get built because the visitors and the non-Floridians contribute. And so why would you do it? You literally won't even notice that you have the lower, because it's 1/4 of a penny. And most of the staples that you do aren't taxed subject to the sales tax anyways. So it isn't like families that are struggling at the grocery store, and groceries are expensive, that they're going to see some type of benefit, because they're not. So it's so small. But what it does do, because we're fortunate to have a lot of revenue coming into the state from non-residents, because it's geared to benefit non-residents, it would be over 10 years between $16 and $20 billion fiscal loss for the state. Now, first of all, like, I think that we've paid down debt, we've run big surpluses, we've done tax cuts, we've done key things, key infrastructure projects, education, all that. We have a great formula. We've retired 41% of the state's debt for the whole history of Florida just since I've been governor. We did an accelerated debt repayment program where we're retiring it early, and we've saved the taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars in interest costs. So we've got a great formula. But why would they be doing it? They're doing it because this would basically kill any chance of doing property tax relief for folks. Because what are they going to say next year? Oh, well, we don't have the money to do property tax relief. Because, you know, this is mostly money going to locals. But if you do a major reform, there's going to be a transition period. You may need the state to take some of our surplus and help some of the local communities, like rural communities, as they transition their tax base away from taxing their own people. So the purpose of what they're proposing is to stop us from getting any type of property tax relief. Is there anyone here that would prefer 1/4 of 1 penny relief to property tax relief, or do you want property tax relief? I mean, I don't even think it's a question. And so I've never seen anything be proposed that has so little buy-in. People are not clamoring to give Canadian tourists a tax break. So we need to have a Florida first tax policy here. And that means standing up for our own people before we're standing up for the tourists and the foreigners. And I look forward to working with the Senate and relevant House members to have a good Florida first tax package. But I can tell you, any Florida last tax package is going to be dead on arrival. We are not going to kneecap our ability to provide you property tax relief just so we can give a little bit of a benefit to Canadian tourists. That is not going to happen, so you can take that to the bank. Now, what do we need to do going forward? Obviously, a $47 tax cut is not going to go very far. You won't even notice it because you don't even get that in one. It'd be one thing if you at least got that. You get like 4 cents here, 20 cents here. I mean, it's insane. We need to make sure that we're delivering property tax relief. I propose to do relief this year, but then parlay that into a ballot initiative that would allow Floridians to be able to own their home without having to pay rent to the government. I mean, wouldn't that be great if we can get to that point? But the only way you're going to get to that point is if we continue the successful model that Florida has had. Doing some of these tangents that's going to kneecap our ability to do that is not the right way to go forward as a state. So we want Florida first policies. We want Florida first tax relief. We want to focus our tax reduction efforts on what will make the biggest impact for Florida families, for our senior citizens, for people that are working hard and trying to make ends meet. And that is what we are going to do. I don't want to be 21st in property tax. I want to be at the top. We're the top. We just announced U.S. News. Economy, #1 in America 2 years in a row. Higher education, #1. Overall ranking, we were 13 when I became governor. They now have us at 6 for all these other things. And some of the things they rank, we've deliberately tried to go in a different direction, and I think to the benefit of the state. So we got to build off that. But I want to be top for property tax. I want to be a friend to the taxpayer here in the state of Florida. Let's make sure we have such a unique opportunity. We had 142 million visitors last year. We have a unique opportunity amongst all the states to have non-residents shoulder the tax burden and for us to bring relief to our Florida residents. And that's what's got to be focused. This proposal I've seen floated by the House leadership would do the opposite of that. It would effectively kill any opportunity to do property tax reform. It would shift the tax burden away from the tourists and the foreigners and the snowbirds more towards Florida residents. Why would you deliberately choose to do that when we have this golden goose of all these tourists and visitors and snowbirds that come? And I know they talk about Canadians aren't coming anymore. I can just tell you, I ask people, people are doing well in the industry in Florida. You know, we've had a lot of people come this year. Now, 142 million, I don't know if that could ever be replicated, but we're at least in the ballpark. So that's what we need to be doing. We need to put our constituents first, and it's not about personal agendas. It's about doing what's right by the people that elected us to do, and that is what you can expect from me. Okay, we're going to do Blaise and Golia.
Thank you, Governor. Can everybody hear me okay? First, Governor, I want to thank you, and I think everyone needs to understand that the governor has been leading on a lot of issues, and he's been ahead of the curve on a lot. He was ahead of the curve on COVID. He was ahead of the curve on DEI. He was ahead of the curve on immigration. And he's ahead of the curve, so far ahead of the curve than most people on property taxes. What people have to understand, and I think what everyone listening to me understands, the people in this audience understand, is that we are headed, if not already in, a property tax revolt. We are seeing property taxes skyrocket at sort of the levels that we saw in the mid-2000s. In the mid-2000s, not different than what we're seeing right now. You've seen a rise in property values, a corresponding rise in property taxes, and then governments have expanded beyond their wildest dreams. Over the last 5 years, just 5 years ago, local governments have increased their general fund budgets by anywhere between 60 to 120%. A lot of them have doubled over the last 5 years. Now, if somebody's going to say that government can't cut, they're lying to you. They can. With the governor's DOGE efforts, with just prudent fiscal responsibility, there is enough money for local governments to cut. But they're not going to cut by themselves. They're going to have to be forced to cut, and this is why giving property tax relief is so important. I did 2 events yesterday, one in the Villages, which is part of my district, and one in Hernando County as part of my district. Governor, we haven't had an opportunity to talk about this, but in total there was about 300 people in both of those events. And I asked the question, would you rather have a sales tax cut or a property tax cut? Every single one, except for 2, said that they wanted a property tax cut. Now, the 2 were Canadian, so I understand why they wanted the sales tax cut. But I don't understand, and it's not just them, Governor. I'm going to tell you.
Why don't we do this room? If you had a choice, property tax relief or 1/4 of 1 penny in sales tax, who would choose property tax relief?
There you go.
Who would choose 1/4 of 1 penny? Anybody?
There are no Canadians.
We don't have any
in the room.
Canadians here? Come on. All right, well, that was unanimous.
But look, it's just not the people in the Floridians and the homeowners that want property tax relief. Nobody that I talk to, Governor, even in the legislature, believe that a sales tax cut is the way to go. A lot of our members, our friends in the Senate, a lot of our friends in the House believe that property taxes cuts is the way to go. Look, the proposals out there are about $5 billion. They started off with $5 billion, then they're down to $2.8 billion. But let's start with the $5 billion number. On the governor's plan, every person, every homeowner is going to be able to get roughly a $1,000 property tax rebate. And that's substantive compared to about $50 under a sales tax. And that's a big deal. But here's the thing also. Cutting sales tax, let's walk through this. Local governments, I think most people that agree that government cannot get enough money if it was up to them, right? Do you really think that if we cut their sales tax that they're not going to make up their shortfalls by turning around and raising the millage rate and getting that money back, or putting referendums on the ballot to replace the state sales tax with the local sales tax?
Yeah, they would just add, if the state legislature did 1/4 of 1 penny, a lot of the locals would just add 1/4 of 1 penny to theirs. I mean, like literally, you probably wouldn't get $47 either. Most places you probably end up getting nothing. And it would obviously kneecap the ability to do property tax relief at the state level.
Yeah, look, so this idea that they're going to save $56 or whatever it is I just think it's a lie. Because locals are just going to raise and they're going to replace that revenue. The only way to get locals to cut their budgets is by substantive tax reform, and that's what Governor is talking about. He's floated a bunch of ideas, doubling, tripling the property tax exemption. He's talking about taking the next 6-7 months and really investigating and see how we can get rid of property taxes for homesteaded properties. These are big ideas. These ideas that are the ones that attract people to live in the state of Florida, and that's why we have the moniker, the free state of Florida. So I can tell you, Governor, that from my perspective, from the people that I talk to all the time, including my colleagues, nobody wants sales tax relief. Everyone wants property tax relief. I do not see the wisdom in giving tax relief to Canadians, Brazilians, and tourists when we can give it to our neighbors, our friends, and our family.
Well said. Okay, Bob McClure, James Madison Institute is one of our groups headquartered in Tallahassee that gets involved in policy in Florida and limited government philosophy, obviously, with James Madison. So I appreciate him being here.
Thank you, Governor, and thank you for hosting us today. Isn't it great to live in a state where the argument is about cutting taxes as opposed to finding ways to spend more money in Tallahassee? That's the greatness of the leadership of the governor and the senators in this room, is that the men and women who believe in giving money back to you as opposed to finding ways to spend more of it. Senator Ngolia talked about it. We are truly the free state of Florida, and that's the important thing to understand here. Property tax in the governor's proposal is about the American dream. My youngest daughter finally got married recently, and she married a young man, and they live in an apartment. They want to buy a home. They want to realize the American dream. It's about wealth creation. It's about what's next for our children. And for those of you that have grandchildren, it's about what's next for your grandchildren. In this state, the governor, as he referenced, we have been, depending on the index, #1 place to start a business, #1 place to retire, best education system in the country. Every index has Florida in the top 3 or 4. The 2 issues where we were challenged and have been challenged, one was property insurance, which the governor and past legislatures addressed to bring down the cost of property insurance, and the governor and his leadership and the leadership of past legislatures have done that. Now we're fighting that back to continue to bring down the cost of property insurance. The other is housing affordability, and with that directly comes property taxes. Property taxes continue to rise, as the governor referenced, faster than the rate of inflation at the local level. This is not an issue of revenue for local governments. This is a spending issue for local governments. So the ability to cut, eliminate, reduce property taxes is cleaner for the consumer, gives more money to the pockets of Floridians like my young daughter and her new husband who want to start a life here in Florida. She is an 8th generation Floridian. And so property taxes will bring to Florida more money in your pocket and the pockets of those around the state. It's cleaner, it's the American dream, and it is a wealth creation. The sales tax reduction simply gives more money, as has been referenced, to Canadians, Canadian tourists, and people, snowbirds who come here and then leave. So as a policy organization with the research in hand, we at the James Madison Institute have done tremendous work on the data and the role of reducing or eliminating property taxes. We are truly the free state of Florida. We have 1 or 2 issues we must continue to push on top of the great things that have been done. And the governor's leadership on reducing or eliminating property taxes is the key to a better future in Florida for you and for your children and for your grandchildren.
Thank you. Well said. Okay, Nathan, one of our local realtors.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. I'm here to talk about the affordability of it. So I'm in the industry day to day, people buying $1 million homes and people buying their first home at $350,000. And the affordability is such a challenge right now. If you go buy a house under $400,000, a $370,000 house, you're going to have a tax bill of $5,000 more. That's over $400 a month that you're going to be paying for your taxes. And people go and they do their online application for their mortgage. They didn't speak to anybody, and they look up a house and like, oh, taxes are $2,500. And they get their pre-qualification letter, and then they go to another lender, and you do a tax estimator, and you realize, oh, it's not $2,500. Your taxes are going to be $6,700. And all of a sudden, they go from a $400,000 purchase to a $300,000 purchase, and they cannot afford to buy these homes. You talked about your children, your daughter renting an apartment. I have 2 kids, a 7 and a 6-year-old. And 20 years from now, if values don't increase at all, which we know is not going to happen, they're going to go buy a $400,000 house, and they're not going to be able to afford that tax bill on it. Meanwhile, somebody that has just bought a house 7 years ago, their house could be worth $1 million, and it will be less than somebody buying an entry-level home. That's great for all of us that have owned homes, but my kids and your kids and the future kids, or people that want to relocate to Florida and raise their families here, they start looking elsewhere because they just cannot simply afford the property tax burden that comes onto them. And you could be 28 years old and lived in Florida your entire life, and you get no tax benefit from buying your first home. Your parents might have gotten the benefit, and that's fantastic, but now you get to buy a house, and your tax bill is higher than your parents' home, and it's worth 3 times as much as yours. And I think the homestead exemption, I think it started in the 30s. I believe in 2008, maybe it was increased up to $50,000. Well, since 2008, we've seen property values double, triple, sometimes quadruple in value, and yet the homestead exemption hasn't changed. So I'm excited about this initiative, and I'm excited about what you're doing. Happy to be here.
Great. Okay. Kathy, Tampa
Okay.
resident, thank you.
Yes.
Make
and-
sure you speak into the mic.
And retired Tampa resident. And we pay $529 a month towards our property taxes. That's a huge sum of money for someone who's on a fixed income. And what does an individual do when something impacts your budget? You look for ways to reduce your expenditures, which is what we did. So we don't have cable anymore, and we changed our phone plan, and we made took the excruciating step of going from 2 cars to 1. Trust me, it's a traumatic experience. So what I would like to see is for our elected officials to think about, when they think about raising taxes, think about where that money's coming from. It's coming from people like me, human beings, people who have, there's an impact to that. And when you tell taxing authorities that they can raise the taxes by 3%, they're going to do it. So there's no incentive for our elected officials to look within their own budget first before they put that impact on just the ordinary citizen. So, Governor, I can tell you that in order for you to benefit from a sales tax decrease, you have to have the money to buy something. And if you don't have it, it's meaningless. Whereas a $500 reduction in our property tax would be awesome, and we support that 100%. Thank you.
Great. Well, thanks so much. So, look, when we're doing this stuff, whether it's Jay Collins, Blaze in the Senate, me as governor, you run, you tell people what you're going to do, and we all said we were going to put Floridians first. Like, there were a lot of individual issues we were talking about, law and order, fiscal responsibility. We were talking about, fighting the woke, doing all the stuff, and we've delivered on that more than any other state by a country mile. But you got to just continue to be true to that. And so we have an opportunity to have a debate about, are we going to put our Florida residents first, or are we going to do something that honestly nobody has asked for? I go around the state. I travel this state more than anybody, probably. Of all 23+ million, I probably travel to different corners of the state more than anyone. First governor that's done events in all 67 counties during my first term. We'll do it again this term and finish that. I was just in Key West the other day. I'm here in Tampa. We're going to be all this stuff. I talk to people, and you hear things, and I can be in Tampa, I can be in Pensacola, I could be in Miami. There are things that you will see connected, right? Even though they're diverse, different communities, you will see you will hear similar things. And you don't hear that what Florida needs to succeed is 1/4 of 1 penny of a sales tax that will benefit a lot of people. Because if you think about it, 20% of our sales tax is tourists, But then another big percent are businesses and non-residents. And so a snowbird is not a tourist, right? They're non-residents. They're here 4 months, 5 months of the year, but they're not Florida residents. They pay a lot of it. So really, the Florida residents, in terms of the total sales tax burden, is not a huge percentage. I mean, it may be 50, 60% at most. But just imagine, what other state has the primary source of revenue for its government come 40% from non-individual residents of the state, 50% maybe, depending on how you do it. And I think probably the numbers with 142 million visitors, I think it probably would be a lot more in terms of that. Man, we have such a great opportunity. But nobody is asking to do this quarter of a penny deal. I mean, none of the senators support it. I'm not talking, have you guys talked to a single senator that supports that as an idea? Honestly, a lot of the House members don't support it either. But the way the House is run, they threaten you, they take away your committee, they do all that. And so it's basically, run with those types of tactics. And so a lot of them don't speak it. Now, I would say sometimes, leadership has costs, and you should be courageous and be willing to do right, even if there's going to be retribution against you. I mean, imagine if I had taken the position during COVID, we weren't going to have the state be open because I was getting attacked mercilessly every day. Then the state would have failed. So obviously, I had to take the hits on behalf of the people. I'm totally willing to do that. That goes with the territory. When you lead, they're going to come after you. When you're standing on principle, there's a lot of people that don't like that, and you're going to get hit. But what happens is that courage is contagious. And, you can see it in the Senate with guys stepping out. You see that when other legislative bodies do it. But I think this is a very clear contrast between doing policy that will benefit the people we represent, that's consistent with what we campaigned on, or going in a tangent that is not going to help people in any meaningful way that are Florida residents, but will put the final nail in the coffin of any hope to do property tax relief. And that's not what they ran on when they asked for your vote in 2022, in 2024, and even before that. So let's get this right. Let's make sure that we have a good budget and Florida first tax policies. Okay, with that, I'll take some questions.
Governor, two questions. One, sir, is do you have a specific proposal that you're making today? Is there something that you can promise hard and fast that you're going to fight for?
Well, we put out many months ago a proposal, depending on the level of money that they want to dedicate to property tax relief, that we could deliver rebates between $250 to $1,000 per homesteaded Floridian. It's also the case that having money that is not being frittered away to help the Canadians on the margin, all of that in future years, that revenue that we get from the tourists and the non-residents, that can go help with a property tax transition. Because we have some rural counties, they like the Tampa Bay area, like Pinellas County, Tampa, you have visitors. You can do things. I mean, I think reduce expenditures is the first one, but you can shift burdens to them in other ways. It may not be as easy in some of the rural areas. And so what I've said is it's totally reasonable for us running big surpluses to help some of those rural counties, in a transition period, if it means giving major relief to their residents in terms of property taxes. So I think that there's a lot that can be done, but I think even apart from our proposals, which we did put out many months ago, this 1/4 of a penny, it really does kill property tax relief going forward, because the people that propose this are going to turn around and tell you, we can't afford it, we don't have enough, you don't have enough money to be able to do it, it's just not going to work and all that. That will happen. You can see this. I mean, you see what's doing. So why would we want to foreclose the idea and the possibility of major property tax relief, even in a ballot initiative next year, just simply because you're doing a 1/4 of a penny that's going to be geared towards tourists, non-residents, and our residents get $47 spread out over how many purchases, I don't know. I think the choice on that's pretty clear.
And then second, Governor, when it comes to, as you said, ballot initiatives, are you concerned at all that the reforms that you put in place will make it more difficult, or even a ballot initiative that you're in favor of to get on the ballot?
Well, I think it makes it more difficult for fraudulent petitions to be submitted, and I don't think whether the constitutional amendment is something I like or don't like, that it should be put on the backs of fraud. And we saw massive fraud in 2024, and that is not the way you do business. This whole thing has become a cottage industry where you have well-financed special interest groups. There was foreign money coming in 2024. You had one weed company, corporate weed company, spent $141 million to try to change Florida's constitution. So I think the reforms that were done are good government reforms. And if there's people that are running an amendment that I happen to agree with, I don't want them to be able to do fraudulent petitions either. I don't want them to be able to have misleading language on the ballot. I don't want them to be able to do this in a way that is manipulating the process. And that's true regardless of whether something I like or not like. Now, I think the goal that we would have, and I think Blaze and Jay would agree, is we have massive supermajority of Republicans in the legislature. The legislature can put constitutional amendments on the ballot. It doesn't have to go through citizen initiative. There's basically three ways you can amend the Florida Constitution. Legislature, supermajorities put it on the ballot, voter ratifies. Constitutional Revision Commission, every 20 years they propose, put it on the ballot, voters ratify. And then the final way is the citizen initiative, which has really become a special interest initiative where they get signatures, get on the ballot, and then the voters ratify or not. So the legislature can do this. Now, I think one of the frustrating things, and that's part of the reason why I've been concerned about what I've seen out of the House, is I think they're laying the groundwork to be able to reject our call to do a ballot, put something on the ballot through the legislative process. I think the Senate will do it. We have almost a 3-to-1 majority in the House of Representatives for Republicans. What excuse is there not to give people relief and let citizens have a say in voting whether they want property tax relief or not? But I'm concerned when you see that committee the last day of the session, when you see this gambit with the 1/4 of 1 penny, knowing that that would be, you know, a big, quote, revenue loss, and would give a pretext to say, hey, guys, we just can't do it. We know you like property. We know you need relief. We want to give you relief. Oh, we just don't have the resources. We don't have the money. And so, you know, you're basically, again, it's a shifting of the burden away from the tourists towards more Florida residents. And they will, local governments, if they do 1/4 of a penny, a lot of the local governments will fill that void anyways. So it'll preclude you from getting property tax relief, basically, and you're probably going to end up paying the same rate in most of the counties in Florida anyways. I mean, let's just be clear. We know how all this works. And so, so the question is going to be, are you willing to put this on the ballot for 2026? That's something you guys should ask your state representatives. Are they committed to having a constitutional amendment proposed? And the reason we have to do a constitutional amendment is because under Florida's Constitution, the millage rates, all this stuff is vested in local governments. It's not vested in the state government. And we have a tangential role with the required local effort, but this is basically a local issue, and so that's why you would need to make a constitutional change, just like you have homestead. And there's so many things that you can do that would be really, really meaningful. You know, my view is like, you know, you have someone like Kathy, they own the home. Why are we continuing to tax them? You know, it's like you go buy a TV from Best Buy, you pay a sales tax, you put it on your wall, and then you watch it. You don't keep paying taxes on it indefinitely. So why is this something that we think is okay? But even things like Blaze is talking about, much more generous homestead exemption would be helpful. I mean, this is not good enough for where the property values are. There's so many things that I think would make a real difference in the lives of Floridians. And it's not just in Florida. This is a nationwide issue where people that have more residential mortgages, they pay more in property tax and insurance than they do on the principal and interest on their mortgages. It used to be the opposite. Principal interest was the main payment, little bit of taxes, little bit of insurance. Now you've seen that change, and you've had massive increases in property taxes and insurance in other states. CNBC just did an analysis since 21. They found that Utah had the highest increase in that. And, I mean, Florida, a lot of people thought Florida would be higher. I think they had us ranked like 10th or 11th, and we had 6 major hurricanes in the last 7 years. The reforms we've done have moderated. There's still, there's more I think that I'd like to see done. But the reality is, you can't control the price of a home. The government can. It's a market, right? On insurance, like, we got rid of some things that were driving up costs, the litigation, but ultimately that's a market too. The one thing that is purely subject to political control is taxes. That's not market-based. That's we the people deciding how we want to do this. What powers do you want to give the government to be able to tax your property and your homes? And you have the ability to change that through a constitutional amendment. So I think it'd be really exciting, and I think you'd get a lot of support.
Gov, can I jump in on this?
Yeah.
Can I jump in? Guys, I just want to, a couple of things, and I want to piggyback off what the governor is saying, because I think this is important context. The first thing is that we do have a supermajority, and that is a governing mandate. That is the voters telling everyone that we like what you are doing, we want you to continue what we are doing. And by us not doing substantial reforms, keeping up with what we were doing with a supermajority in the legislature, that is plain missed opportunities, okay? And the missed opportunities that we're missing, amongst a lot of other things, are delivering property tax relief reform. Here's the deal. Everyone in this room, raise your hand, would you rather have property tax relief over sales tax relief? Almost everyone we talk to in the legislature would rather have property tax relief than sales tax relief. Here's some numbers for you. This is the way our current property tax exemption structure works. Your first $25,000 of your property taxes are exempt. Your next $25,000 is taxed. Your third exemption is another $25,000 exemption, but the school boards have an exemption from an exemption, so you really don't have $50,000 worth of property tax exemptions. On average, you have about $39,000 worth of property tax exemption, and this is why it's important. When Homestead,
Can you just explain, in case someone, like, when you say exemption, what does that mean?
you're not taking away school funding on the second property tax exemption. So you have 25 that's exempted, the next 25 is taxed, and then the 25 on top of that, you have an exemption, but we hold schools harmless. We don't take away their funding on that exemption. But when you blend it all in, you're at around $39,000. Why is this important? When property taxes, when Homestead was initially instituted, because of the value of the homestead, the first one, the $25,000, compared to the median price of a home, about a third of your property, 33% of your property was shielded from taxation. Today, with property tax, with values being so high, it's about 9%. And people are feeling this, and this is why this is important, and this is why people lobby me, they lobby Senator Collins, they lobby the governor on property tax relief and not sales tax relief, is because they feel it. When they pay their mortgage, when they see the auto draft coming out from their banks, and they see that they not only have to pay for the new tax bill, but they have to catch up for the last tax bill, they see it coming out. If property tax reform in any form, increasing the homestead exemption, whether it's double, tripling, or eliminating, it will, mark my words, it will pass, and I think the governor agrees with me, with 75% of the vote. Then why is a supermajority not delivering property tax relief now? That is frustrating. Here's another thing that everyone needs to understand, and the governor knows this, we've had this conversation, is that if we get structural property tax reform on the ballot in 2026, people are not going to feel that until 2027. Because it has to be voted on, it then has to be implemented. People are going to pay their tax bills in 25 and 26. What happens over the next 2 years? People are hurting now. They need property tax relief now. The governor, what this governor is saying is that if we are going to spend money on tax cuts, let's deliver it to Florida families, a Florida first tax cut, so they can benefit now and the next year while we get structural property tax reform on. That's not only what a Republican supermajority should do, it's also pretty darn good governance.
Yeah. Yes. the Attorney General is legally correct. Those law enforcement agencies were not party to that case. A judge has Article 3 authority to decide cases and controversies of the parties before the court. The judge does not have roving authority to set policy throughout the state or the United States of America. And so he has no obligation to restrict people who were not parties to the case. And so he's right on the law. He has the courage to stand and do what's right, even knowing he's going to get blowback. And he's been very strong Attorney General for the state. But this raises a larger issue. Is it we, the people, that get to decide these things through the medium of elections, or are there unelected, lifetime appointed judges who get to run immigration policy and run military policy? There's a role for the judiciary, but it's to decide a case and controversy before you. It's not to go outside the bounds of judicial policy, a judicial role, and try to enact policy. The U.S. Supreme Court just had to reel in some of these district judges because they said the President of the United States, as the Commander-in-Chief, was not able to say that you can't do transgenderism in the military. Excuse me, President has sole authority for unit readiness, good order and discipline, all those things. That is absolutely his judgment to make, and these district judges said no. The U.S. Supreme Court had to come in and overrule that. So this is a larger issue of you have judges that just disagree with the choices that voters are making, that elected officials are making, not on constitutional grounds. They just don't like it. So they want to throw sand in the gears, and we know how this happens in Florida. Almost anything we do, the left runs to the courts. They try to find a liberal judge. Almost every time the liberal judge will rule for them. And then what happens? We appeal, and we eventually win on appeal 90% of the time. And so what this district judge is doing is she's trying to exercise authority that she does not possess. Fine, if there's parties to the case and she's rendered a decision, even though it's a flawed decision that will be appealed, fine, the parties to the case. You can't go out and then say some sheriff in the Panhandle is somehow subject to your order. They were not involved in the litigation at all. So I think it's appropriate pushback that he's providing the judge. I think he's legally in the right on this, and I think it raises the larger issue of who governs this country. Because I can tell you, if when the founders created the Constitution, if James Madison and Hamilton and John Jay were writing in the Federalist Papers, well, under this Constitution, you know, all the thorny issues will just be punted to the unelected judiciary, the Constitution would not have even been adopted by this country, and we all know that. So when I was asked about this when the selection started, I was not involved. I haven't talked to him. I trust the people that were involved in that process. They were trustees that I've appointed that have performed exemplary for the state of Florida in those capacities. And so they've gone through that. Now there's more process that's going to happen. But I will say this, there can be no ambiguity. I don't think anybody is going to be unclear about what the expectations are in the state of Florida with respect to higher education. We reject woke indoctrination. We were the first state in the country to eliminate DE&I from our public universities. We've done more than any state to restore the mission of universities to the classical sense of what a university should be. Teach people to think for themselves, pursue truth, prepare our students to be citizens of our republic, and we're proud of that. And so those expectations are clear, and I don't think that a candidate would have been selected who is not going to abide by those expectations, and I think that you will likely see that'll be very clear in this instance. But I'll let the process play out. But we have put a real serious stake in the ground on this. And I would also note, again, I wasn't involved in the process. I don't know the candidate. But if we were here 5 years, 10 years ago, and I told you that the president of the University of Michigan was going to leave Michigan to come to Gainesville, most people probably would not think that that would be a move that someone would want to make, right? Because Michigan has traditionally been viewed as the best or one of the top 2 or 3 public universities in the entire United States of America. And so it's been reported, in addition to some of those statements, which, you know, the DEI stuff, I disagree with those comments, but I also understand when we were leading against DEI, we were the only state to do so. It was everywhere. It was the price of admission to be involved in these universities at the time. We put the stake in the ground and really led the efforts. Now, you see a couple years later, Trump administration is on full frontal against it, and the tide has shifted. When we were putting the stake in the ground, we were swimming against the tide, but we knew what we were doing was right. So I think, and I think he eliminated his DEI office in Michigan, but I don't think that anyone would want to come to the University of Florida if your goal was to pursue a woke agenda. You're going to run into a brick wall here in the state of Florida. We're proud of what we're offering. We just got ranked #1 in higher education by U.S. News and World Report. We haven't raised tuition. No Florida in-state tuition increases since I've been governor, not one penny, $6,300 to go to these universities. And so those expectations, I think, have been very, very clear. Those expectations will be followed by anybody who's in a position of leadership in any of our universities. And I'm confident that that's how it will shake out.
Hey, Governor, what is your response to some of the city and county leaders who are concerned when it comes to a reduction of property taxes, not for schools, but for other crucial government services?
We understand, and that's why we want to make sure we have the flexibility at the state level to help some of the local communities who may not have the luxury of what a Miami-Dade would have, or Pinellas, or a Naples, Collier County, where you can bank on tourists coming. You know, you can obviously look at expenditures, but you can also shift the tax to the non-residents. That can be done very easily. Clearly, we're committed. I mean, I have a record. We've funded education more K-12 than any governor administration in history. We have the highest per pupil spending right now. Not that that's a guarantee of success, because some of the places that have exorbitant spending have really bad results. But nevertheless, our commitment's been clear on that, and no one's demonstrated a stronger commitment to public safety. We recognize, as much as we're supportive of our state agencies, Highway Patrol, Florida Department of Law Enforcement, Fish and Wildlife, they've done a great job. They are a small fraction of the overall law enforcement footprint in this state. We have police departments at the municipal level, sheriff's departments at the county level. Those are important, and those will continue to be very vital and viable institutions in the life of the people of Florida. So I'm confident all that stuff can be addressed in a way that is, yes, looking at these expenditures for the counties and municipalities, seeing what is vital, what is not, but also providing relief for people to be able to stay in their homes, to be able to afford a home. All this stuff is really, really significant. But we've done more at the state level to bolster local law enforcement than any administration. We did $1,000 bonuses for every sworn law enforcement and firefighter in the state of Florida 3 years in a row. We have a $5,000 signing bonus for new recruits into our law enforcement agencies, including state, but also municipal and county, and that's been very, very successful. So our commitment has been really, really strong. We're going to continue that commitment. We understand quality of life is important. We understand that there are services that are really important. But I also look at some of these counties that have seen, you know, really dramatic increases in expenditures over the last 5 or 6 years, and I ask, you know, did all of a sudden, you know, keeping the streets safe, is that 40% more expensive all of a sudden? I mean, I know we've had inflation, right? But I think you look at that and you're like, well, no, probably what's happened is they had a gusher of property tax revenue coming in. They were able to be a little bit looser with the purse strings, and so did that. But I don't think you want to institutionalize that. And it's the same thing really anywhere, across the board. Look at the federal government. They jacked up spending for COVID, and they're basically codifying that level of spending or higher in what they're discussing up there in Washington, D.C. What's wrong with going back to the spending levels before COVID and locking that in, that would be more sustainable for this country. You know, we're over $37 trillion in debt. As Florida has paid down debt, the federal government has continued to add it. So they could do that too, and I think a lot of the local governments will. Okay, great to see you guys. Take care. Bye-bye.